When you think Muslim hero, what comes to your mind? Do you think Salah ad-Din, Mehmed Fatih, or how about the Mamluk Sultan Saifuddin Qutuz? All of them military leaders, all of them wielded unimaginable strength. But what if I told you that there existed another Muslim hero whose story was so miraculous that it seems like something out of a novel? Chances are you probably never heard of him. From humble beginnings as a student of knowledge to the rise of being the founder of a new movement that would transform and revive Islam right here in the belly of Africa. This transformative movement would shake the hearts of the people in West Africa and would change its social, political, and religious character forever. Under its shade, it produced scholars, Quran memorizers, and morally righteous people from both men and women. He was a scholar in his own right and wrote hundreds of works on Islamic sciences. He even penned this book, which is a little manual on how to establish Islam, Iman, and Ihsan in our lives, which is really cool. For decades, he clashed with an oppressive class of rulers and just so happened to establish a new caliphate state along the way. That's right, you heard that correctly. He established a new caliphate right in the middle of Africa. He was perhaps one of the most influential West African scholars in Islamic history. Some scholars said he was the Mujaddid of his time, while there were others who said that he was nothing but a disruptive nuisance. So was he a Mujaddid? And more importantly, who was he? Let's find out. Othman, then Fodio, the sheikh that would change Hausaland forever. But before we can talk about who Othman is and what he's done, we've got to talk about what Hausaland is and what it used to be before the Shehu arrived on the scene. Shehu meaning sheikh in the Hausa language. So let's rewind the tape of time and go back even further than 1754, which is Dan Fodio's birthday. Hausaland was the center of Bilad al-Sudan, which is a vast region of the savanna grassland. It's like a melting pot of different ethnic groups including the Hausas and Fulanis. Prior to Islam, Hausaland was dominated by pagan beliefs. It wasn't until the 14th century when Islam made its way in. With the spread of literacy, the constant flow of Islamic literature, Hausaland became increasingly incorporated into the wider Islamic fraternity. Its people became well informed about Islamic thought, and later on, Islam emerged as a political force which changed political leadership in some major Hausa states. In the 16th century, an invasion of neighboring power and the seizure of Timbuktu weakened the intellectual impetus and upset the established political stability of Hausaland. This was because this neighboring power kept Hausa states in check. The following 2 centuries that followed saw powerful Hausa states engage in continuous devastating interstate warfare. As warfare entrenched itself in the lands, rulers became desperate for victory, which often meant the violation of boundaries set by Islam. Political leadership in Hausaland degenerated into tyranny and corruption, which resulted in widespread oppression, injustice, and misery for most people. Paganism resurfaced its ugly head, and some Muslims mixed Islamic practices with traditional pagan rituals. The result was disbelief, inequity, and open defiance of Allah's laws had become the order of the day. The social system was immoral and women were oppressed. As the Shehu said, they were neglected like animals. Mixing was very open and rampant, cheating and fraud was rife as certain Sharia laws concerning property were geared to the Hausa ruling class. Muslim scholars were silent in the face of such tyranny and injustice. Some even supported it and others objected to it. One of the few who objected earlier on was Sheikh Jibril ibn Umar, none other than Uthman's teacher. He was highly enthusiastic about the revivification and restoration of Islam, so much so that he in fact organized a jihad. Sheikh Jibril and others who came before him embodied the idea of tajdid, which is ingrained in the tradition of Islamic thought. Tajdid is a philosophy of renewal and reinvigoration of a society from its dark heedlessness to a righteous rising. For example, the prophethood as a concept is intertwined with the idea of tajdid. It was out of this rising tide of discontent on one hand and expectation on the other that Uthman dan Fodio emerged. So, now that we covered the background of which Shehu Othman came from, we can now look at how he came to change them. The Shehu was born into a highly cultured family and was fed religious Islamic knowledge until he couldn't fit it within his mental capacity. His father was Muhammad ibn Saleh, known generally as Fodio, or the Learned, and his mother was Hawa bint Muhammad ibn Uthman. His first teachers were his parents, as he learned the Quran under his father's hand, and most of his education was from his family and close relatives. Afterwards, he studied Hadith, in which he received qualifications in the 6 most canonical books of Hadith, including Al-Muwatta by Imam Malik. He then mastered Arabic, grammar, morphology, and rhetoric, plus getting qualification in tafsir of the Quran, and became a jurist in the Maliki madhab. From a young age, he would perfect basic sciences until he was given a license or ijaza to teach. But when he would teach, he would never stop learning. This cycle would continue right up until his death. Of all the lessons he learned, of all the ideas he consumed, none would plant themselves deeply as much as the idea of tajdeed passed down to him by his Sheikh Jibril ibn Umar. As mentioned and explained previously, part of the process of tajdeed involves a Mujaddid taking a group of people and sculpting their character to that of the prophetic model. These people then go out to call for the revival of Islam. They are the shapers and shakers who will shoulder the responsibility of running the new social order when it is established. Othman dan Fodio, as a Mujaddid, created people who are reflections of his own image, who in turn create others in the same fashion, and so on. He couldn't rely on the scholars that had rooted themselves in the corrupt, infertile land. Instead, he created his own community of scholars and teachers. These students of his formed the inner core of a movement and spearheaded the prosecution of the true jihad and carried it to its successful end. This movement was known as the Jama'ah. One thing to note about the Shehu and his teachings is that he never invented a new form of teaching. He never preached a new lesson, nor did he reinvent the wheel. He taught from the same books that were taught for the past 1,000 years or so, and took lessons from his teachers who had chains of transmissions all the way back to the Prophet. If that's the case, then what made the Shehu so different and so effective? Well, the answer can be found in his writings, whereby he mentions that scholars lack the knowledge of the exact nature and the implications of current nepotism, moral transgression, and political tyranny, rather than knowledge. Islam was missing from Hausa scholarship. In other words, knowledge of Islam should not only be studied, but it should be practiced as well. From the moment Dan Fodio started preaching in 1774, at age 20, he met much opposition for his orthodox views, as some scholars felt envious of the young sheikh's growing pupils. He based himself in Degal and travelled to regions around its radius. At this early stage, Othman avoided authorities altogether and warned his students of becoming cozy with rulers, as he himself was not in the habit of going to kings, nor had he anything to do with them. But years later, when his movement became too big to stay under a rock, his affair became well known to the kings, and so found it politically correct to approach them. In 1780, he went to the king of Goba, Bawa, and preached to him the true message of Islam and advised him to establish justice in his lands. Although advice fell on deaf ears, Othman walked away from the encounter as a sheikh to be taken seriously, and so even those who did not fear God were afraid to reject Othman's preaching because of his contact with the ruler. Whether it was deliberate or not, this was one of the first genius moves the Shehu made that gave way to a successful transformation. So Othman kept on traveling, preaching, teaching, gaining traction, and successfully accumulating students from places where people are known to be completely ignorant, like Zamfarawa. His assemblies were filled with crowds of men and women, which often got him into the crosshairs of other scholars. He was attacked for apparently preaching to mixed crowds, and that women shouldn't be going out of their homes, even for religious knowledge, to attend his classes. First of all, Shehu Othman seated men and women separately. Secondly, he questioned, if women are obliged to go out to perform Hajj, then why is she then not allowed to go out and learn about her faith? As a matter of fact, he regarded those scholars who opposed this as hypocrites, who left their wives, daughters, and sisters ignorant at home while he goes and gives knowledge to other people. In 1788, the Shehu had made considerable progress in establishing himself as a moral and social focus in Hausaland and in endearing himself to a large cross-section of Hausa communities. He was invited for a second time to Goba to visit the Sultan again, only this time to offer Eid prayers. When Othman and his followers responded to the invitation, Bawa had seen this progress and saw the Shehu as a community leader as well as a respected voice this time. Perhaps in an effort to buy the loyalty of the Shehu, the king offered wealth in alms like gold. Othman stood up before the king and said he and his community are in no need of his wealth. Instead, he requested a couple of things. Number 1, that the Shehu himself be allowed a free hand to call people to Allah. 2, no hindrance be placed before people who wish to respond to the call. 3, members of the Jama'ah who were identified with their turbans for men and their head covers for women are to be respected. 4, that all prisoners are to be freed. Number 5, people should not be burdened by heavy unjust taxes. Bawa, seeing the writing on the wall as he stood in front of the Shehu and his many followers, accepted and granted the requests. Another successful outcome after another visit to the ruler. By the time he had reached the age of 40 in 1794, Uthman dan Fodio had become the quintessential voice, teacher, scholar, preacher, and leader in all of West Africa. With this reputation and fame, tension grew between the Shehu's Jama'ah and the aristocratic Hausa rulers. Some scholars grew jealous of his movement as they were quick to criticize and scrutinize every move the Shehu made. It was at this time where there was no mention of the Shehu traveling to preach anymore. He receded back to Degal, which was the center of learning for people to come and receive knowledge and guidance. As a reformer, education was his greatest tool. He educated the common people, Islamic doctrine, and separated advanced pupils in different classes. His advanced pupils would stick to him and learn from his guidance throughout their lives. He wanted his pupils to teach in different areas, but was adamant on opposing letting unqualified teachers teach. The Shehu was a prolific writer, writing books contemporarily for his people according to their understanding, as he regarded contemporary writings are of much greater value, because every learned man knows about the people of his particular time. The Sheikh's intention was to establish Sharia and implement it to its fullest extent. This naturally meant that his reformatory movement butt heads with the politics of the time. The Jama'ah grew bigger, more people came to settle in Degal, even some soldiers joined the Jama'ah. Meanwhile, the king Bawa had passed on and his son Nafata inherited his throne and his problems with the Jama'ah in 1790. Where Bawa was covertly opposing Othman, Nafata openly sought to destroy the Shehu and his Jama'ah. The Jama'ah threat had become too big to ignore. Othman had broken off from the degenerate order, his movement had its own leadership and a distinct social and moral identity. The rulers for the first time were brought to the situation where their pockets are not full and their efforts unprofitable. They knew that the rise of a new Islamic order meant that all they had sought to attain through opportunistic exploitation and oppressive laws would be swept away. The Hausa rulers were fully aware of these consequences and sought to end the growing threat. So when they found out the Shehu was urging his followers to arm themselves in 1795, this straw didn't just break the camel's back, it broke the whole caravan. Finally, after 20 years of growth right under the nose of the oppressive rulers, Nafata issued his infamous decree. No one except the Shehu can preach to the people. No one should become a Muslim except those who inherited it from their parents. Those who embraced Islam should return to their religion of their forefathers, i.e. paganism. No man should henceforth wear the turban, nor woman the head covering. Shortly after this, Nafata died and was succeeded by his son Yunfa in 1803. Yunfa had invited Shehu Othman to his palace and sought to end his greatest threat. Upon entering the palace with his brother Abdullahi, the Sultan fired his gun at the Shehu in an attempt to kill him. By some miracle, the gun misfired and almost burnt Yunfa in the process. Uthman dan Fodio had survived the attempt. Yunfa made his enmity clear to Uthman. The Shehu bravely informed Yunfa that he does not fear him nor anyone except Allah. Dan Fodio walked away unharmed and didn't mention this to a single soul. This was the last contact Othman had with any ruler in Goba. The Shehu was a master strategist in using every situation to his advantage, but it is interesting to note that Othman didn't seek to capitalize on this particular situation. He kept quiet because he wanted to safeguard the Jama'ah's well-being and survival. He knew that just because the Jama'ah had a numerical advantage, it doesn't necessarily mean overall success. For 20 years, he had interacted with regimes and sought to provoke him into direct armed confrontation. Dan Fodio exercised restraint and refused to take any premature steps. He was patient and it paid off well. See, the Shehu believed that once an armed confrontation is started, it must be carried out to its logical conclusion, and that if the movement isn't capable of sustaining armed struggle, it should not rush into it unless it merely wants weak and oppressed Muslims to be annihilated. He believed that time was on his side, and that if anybody had feared that time would run out, it was the oppressors themselves, not him. After the threat on the Shehu's life, events followed one after another in rapid succession. This didn't mean throwing off the tyrants because the Jama'ah couldn't muster enough coordinated strength at this point. Hijra was now on the table and, according to the Shehu, obligatory if the Jama'ah was to survive its spiritual journey. Now, I don't know about you, but this is starting to sound like something similar to the Prophet's story. Maybe you should bookmark that. Anyway, some scholars and reciters of the Quran who fled to Gimbana were murdered by Yunfa's soldiers, and their women and children were taken as slaves and sold. To add to the trauma, Yunfa's men were boastfully paraphrasing the Quran. "Bring down upon us the divine punishment, you had promised it, if indeed you were truthful." This was all done in the month of Ramadan. In 1804, the Shehu and his followers left Degal and made Hijra to Gudu. The scale of people fleeing alarmed the rulers of Goba, so much so that efforts were made to stop the mass movements by intimidation, plunder, and slaughter. When this was proven unsuccessful, Yunfa wrote to Othman to ask him to come back. A back and forth of letters between the Shehu and Yunfa took place, which brought about no change. This was due to some corrupt scholars disrupting communications by distorting Othman's letters to be more unreasonable in their conditions for return. The Sultan ordered his governors to take all who traveled to the Shehu as captives. This was followed by persecution of Muslims, killings, and confiscation of property. This, as you would expect, was suffocating the Muslims and left them with no choice but to take up arms and defend themselves. The only option left on the table was jihad. So the flag of Islam was hoisted for the first time in that region. The Sultan would ask for support from different rulers across Bilad Sudan, and that they did. So now, the Jama'ah had to contend with other opposing regional rulers as well as Yunfa and his army. He appointed his brother and esteemed scholar Abdullahi as its commander. The Jama'ah wasn't as organized and well equipped as the Goba forces, as they were made up of people who were poor and driven away from their homes and properties. But they all had one thing in common. That is, their beliefs and being inspired by their love for Allah and His religion. The two armies met at Gurdam on a lake known as Tapkin Kuato in 1804. By some miracle, the Muslims emerged victorious. Abdullahi said this victory was their Battle of Badr. This greatly boosted the morale of the Muslim forces and enhanced the prestige of the Shehu and increased his influence. But this was in no way a complete victory with a bow on top. Several years of hardship laid ahead, and oh how hard they were. They were surrounded by enemies, persistent hunger and starvation, as well as raging war remained an obstacle in the face of their survival. So if the battle of Tapkin Kuato was their Badr, then the battle of Tuantua was their battle of Uhud. Abdullahi was injured and nursing a wound from battle, and Muhammad Bello, Osman's son, was sick. Bello advised that the Jama'ah not go out and meet the enemy. Instead, they should stay close to the camp and remain defensive. The advice was rejected and the two armies met. The result was a crushing defeat to the Muslims. In all, more than 2,000 men were killed, including 200 men who had memorized the Quran by heart. A large portion of morally upright and old students of the Shehu were martyred. It was witnessed that Othman had never been angrier than they have ever seen him before or after that event. Although many moral religious men and women remained, one band of undisciplined and irresponsible Muslims from the Jama'ah attacked people who were at peace with the Muslims. Abdullahi and Bello failed to stop the attack and nearly died when they tried to prevent them. Abdullahi in particular was greatly disturbed and wished to discontinue the march, being certain that Muslims with such undisciplined bands would face utter defeat. He also mentioned that the reason why these misguided individuals found their way into the army is because of the loss of so many righteous men who would otherwise put people in check. The Shehu kept on writing to the rulers of Hausaland, exhorting them to become true Muslims and support the cause of Islam. Sultans mostly refused in arrogance and rejected, while others were killed accepting. Just when news couldn't have been worse, somehow it did. During the second year of Hijra, Yunfa, along with the other fellow rulers, was getting another even greater force prepared against the Muslims. The Jama'ah was divided on whether to go out to meet the enemy or be more defensive. Just like last time, Abdullahi and Bello thought it more strategic to take a more defensive measure, and just like last time, they were rejected in the council meeting. The result was not good. The Muslims were defeated and suffered another staggering loss of about 1,000 men. To say that this was a moment of crisis for the Shehu and the Jama'ah would be an understatement. This defeat put the Jama'ah's fate in jeopardy. The Shehu, in order to boost morale, came out of the mosque and gave a speech and began to preach with love and kindness. He exhorted them to forsake evil doing and turn to the path of righteousness. He prayed for their victory, and his words made them eager to fight again. The fact is, those who were committed to the jihad were firmly in charge, and thousands of others were ready to lay down their lives in the cause of Allah. The result was that the Jama'ah unleashed a fierce counterattack on the enemy, which retreated to Gwandu. This retreat was decisive in the turning point in the struggle, since Muslims never suffered defeat again at the hands of Hausa rulers. After several expeditions were undertaken, leaders from different parts of the region pledged allegiance to the Shehu and recognized him as the new Khalifa in Sokoto. In the 5th year of Hijra, the Shehu decided on a combined assault on Al-Kalawa, the capital of Goba. His son Muhammad Bello was in command this time. Finally, after 4 years of fighting, Al-Kalawa fell and marked the end of Hausa power and the beginning of a new epoch, that of the Khilafah. After the war, the establishment of the Khilafah meant that a new role emerged for the Shehu and his companions. Along with calling people to Islam, they now had to administer the state according to the Sharia stipulated in the Quran and the Sunnah. The Shehu was meticulous in stipulating principles and writing guidelines for which rulers and followers are to abide by if the Khilafah wished to grow morally, socially, economically, and etc. He touched on everything from prioritizing justice in society and politics, employing righteous and courageous scholars as advisors to rulers, utilization of state resources, and being conscientious of the hereafter. He was emphatic on reading the Seerah and retaining the essence of it as the one point of guiding principle for rulers to follow. Shehu Uthman divided the responsibilities for the Khilafah between his two wazirs, Abdullahi, who ran the western parts of the Khilafah, and Muhammad Bello, who administered the eastern parts. The Shehu remained Amir al-Mu'mineen, though he did not take direct part in the administration. He devoted most of his time to teaching and writing, counseling, and guiding the Ummah. By the year 1812, the Shehu had fully given up his responsibilities to the two wazirs. In 1815, he moved to Sokoto, and in 1817, he died at the age of 63. His legacy is astonishing to say the least. Othman dan Fodio was the most important reforming leader of the Western Sudan region. He was a Mujaddid and renewer of the faith who gave his life to the spread of Islam and teaching of its beliefs. His journey remarkably resembled that of the Prophet and his companions. He left behind him a network of students, a large corpus of writings in Arabic and Fulani, and covered most of the Islamic sciences which still enjoy circulation to this day. His importance lies in his activities as the founder of a Jama'ah or Islamic community, the Sokoto Caliphate, which brought the Hausa states and some neighboring territories under a single central administration for the first time in history. May Allah bless the Shehu and his companions and increase the number of people who follow his example. Ameen.
If you enjoyed this video along with all the other content that OnePath Network produces, please support us so we can create more beneficial content for the world. Go to onepathnetwork.com and you can support us from as little as $1 a day. Jazakumullah khair for your support.